Good morning, Pastor Matthew, Hollywood United Methodist Church, joining you as we nearing the end of our journey through the Gospel of Luke, one chapter a day. Started all the way back on December 1st, and we will finish up right there on on Christmas Eve. Today is December the 20th, and so we will read Luke chapter 20, and it reads: One day, as Jesus was teaching the people of the temple and telling the good news, the chief priests and scribes came with the elders and said to him, "Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Who is it who gave you this authority?" Jesus answered them, "I will also ask you a question and you tell me. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin?" They discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why did you not believe him?' But if we say of human origin, all the people will stone us, for they are convinced that John was a prophet." So they answered that they did not know where it came from. Then Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." He began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and leased it to the tenants, and went to another country for a long time. When the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants in order that they might give him his share of the produce of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Next, he sent another slave. That one also they beat and insulted and sent away empty-handed. And he sent still a third. This one they also wounded and threw out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they discussed it among themselves and said, "This is the heir. Let us kill him, so that the inheritance may be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they heard this, they said, "Heaven forbid." But he looked at them and said, "What then does this text mean? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." When the scribes and chief priests realized that he had told this parable against them, they wanted to lay hands on him at that very hour, but they feared the people. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be honest in order to trap him by what he said, so as to hand him over to the jurisdiction and authority of the governor. So they asked him, "Teacher, we know that you are right in what you say and teach, and you show deference to no one, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose head and whose title does it bear?" They said, "The emperor's." He said to them, "Then give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were not able in the presence of the people to trap him by what he said, and being amazed by his answer, they became silent. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him a question. "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her." Jesus said to them, "Those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living, for to him all of them are alive." Then some of the scribes answered, "Teacher, you have spoken well," for they no longer dared to ask him another question. Then he said to them, "How can they say that the Messiah is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool.' David thus calls him Lord. So how can he be his son?" In the hearing of all the people, he said to the disciples, "Beware of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." This is the word of God for us and for many. The people of God, thanks be to God. Continue our journey along with our youth. And Marty is our youth today to offer the questions. And he talks about how whenever the people asked him questions, he always answered right. That's interesting when you think about it. Because I don't know, I'm not that. I don't know if any of y'all feel like you always have the right answer. Um, and it's this interesting thing about Jesus always answering, because Jesus is asked a lot of questions. Just asks a lot of, or he's asked a lot of them. Just asked a lot of questions. And here we have this special idea because the questions, they're loaded questions. They're trapped questions. We are told pretty much from the get-go that they're not sincere. Like when somebody comes up to you and say, "Hey, what's the weather going to be today?" That's a sincere question. When somebody said, "Hey, what was the score of the game last night?" That's a sincere question. Now, also, they could see you, maybe you're dressed for a warm day and it's really cold, or maybe the vice versa, and somebody come up to you and go, what's the weather today? It's not a genuine question. In the same way that perhaps somebody asks you what was the score last night, not because they really want to know, it's because they do know, but perhaps they know that the person they are asking's team lost, and maybe the person who is asking the question, their team won. These aren't genuine, earnest questions. And if we need to, I was talking the other day about what do we bring into the text and what does sometimes Luke set us up. The minute it talks about the Sadducees, now Luke explains it for us. The Sadducees, it is well known that one of the things that they differed on, like the Pharisees with, was the resurrection. Not so much the resurrection of the Messiah, but is in the end time, will God raise up the dead? The Pharisees believed the righteous God's people would be raised up. Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. So when they're asking this question, this absurd question about, they're mentioning Levirate law, which is where if your brother dies married and has no kids, that his brother is to marry his widow. And the first child that they have will be credited as the dead brother's son. So they ask this ridiculous question because they want to hear what he says. And so I think what we see here is in his right, always answered right. I think that Marty can have a different way of putting it too, which is answered rightly, which is not so much is the answer right, it's is his answering correct? Like, is how he answers it in the right way? Because he doesn't always give a clear answer, but he always answers in a way that fully understands why the question is being asked. Jesus is one who knows all of our hearts, all of what's going on. He sees it, and his answer is in return kind of their lack of earnestness. They don't actually want to know an answer. They're looking to trap him. And Marty asks two questions. First is, why do people ask him these questions? We see here, people ask him questions all the time for different reasons. Like I said, sometimes they are genuine. Sometimes they really do want to know what the answer is. But sometimes they're trying to trick him. Or maybe it's also a situation of like, they have an idea of where he's going, but they need him to be clearer on it. Like, so they want to ask it not so much to know the answer, they want to know what his view is, what his thought is, because once they have that, they can put him in the proper camp. So, for example, in this idea of the Sadducees asking, even if we want to give it a genuineness, perhaps what it is, are you on the Sadducee side or the Pharisee side of this question of the resurrection? The same way with the taxes, right? One of the things we have to remember about the taxes is the taxes were to Rome. The people here, God's people, are a subjugated people. They are oppressed people. And when there are taxes, it's a saying of like, here is this group has come in, taken ownership, possession of your land, um, and on top of that, you need to pay them. You need to pay your own bully. And so it's this big question. And obviously, among the people, they really don't like the taxes. It's why we talk about Zacchaeus yesterday being the tax collector. Is that they're people who are hitting them twice, adding insult to injury type of thing. Um, but at the same point, Rome, who's very present, we're in Jerusalem, Passover's coming. We know that not only is the Roman guard there, Pontius Pilate doesn't live in Jerusalem, but he does come into Jerusalem. Probably there's a theory out, and I think it makes sense, that the day that Jesus made his entrance from the side of Bethany, the other side of Jerusalem, the big gate, is where Pontius Pilate would have made his entrance. And so if all of a sudden word gets to Pontius Pilate, and certainly higher up to the emperor or anything, that there is this really, really popular guy telling everybody not to pay your taxes, the Pharisees or the Sadducees or anybody don't have to worry about cracking down on him, because Rome will gladly take care of that. It says, why were the teachers of the law so mean? I think we have to talk about status quo, which is to say that the great poet Patrick O'Tuama, Irish poet, says, that we need a world that works for all people, not a world that works just for who it works for. Which is to say, all on our societies, in all of our worlds, whether they're the good and the bad and everything, there becomes people that are very favored by it. There becomes people for whom this system of society works for them, and they become accustomed to it. And even if it's not the best, there's still this kind of status quo. Like, okay, understand that Jesus kind of comes and upsets the status quo. And so you look at somebody like the scribes and the lawyers and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right? They're all Jewish people. They're all Israelites. Which means they're all under the heel of the emperor. And yet, in spite of that, they've been able to carve out some niches for themselves. Not because of their title or whatever, but just partially because of their title, but they've been able to carve out the niches. That doesn't mean that all the scribes, all the lawyers, all the Pharisees, all the Sadducees were somehow evil people. We know throughout it that it's not. But for some people, it works, and they're comfortable with that. They don't want to upset the apple cart. And maybe they think Jesus is upsetting the apple cart and putting their comfort at risk. So that could be an answer. So thank you, Marty, for those. So we are now firmly into the 20s, and so just a few days left. So I hope you all are enjoying a wonderful day. We have our cantata at Hollywood this Sunday at 10 a.m. And then, of course, on Christmas Eve next week on Tuesday, we have our 4 o'clock family service, our 7 o'clock traditional Christmas service, and our 11 o'clock vigil. So whatever works for you, love to see you there. Bye now.